So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. Welcome to ARM Dev Summit 2021. Our session today is focused on Africa. The African continent, as part of the emerging markets for ARM, is a critical piece of what we want to do in enabling compute anywhere in the world. And today we're going to be hearing from our good friends within the Google developer ecosystem, talking through some of the opportunities and challenges that we're seeing in building out technology solutions and empowering developers in the region. My name is Stephen Ozibo, and I lead the emerging markets business at ARM. And our conversations with Google have evolved rather positively and quickly over the last period. Google has done great work in mapping the African developer ecosystem and identifying the clusters of developers across the continent. The Google Developer Groups is also playing a key role in empowering these developers as they have through the years, and really enforcing the need for Africa to localize its developer talent and create a plethora of opportunities, including tools, certification, and jobs, believe it or not, for these developers to thrive. It's important to see that the developer groups have been segmented through proper, segmentation that includes a separation between core developers and early stage, mid stage, advanced career developer, to developer student clubs, who then become a pipeline for more knowledge and education resources as we catch them young, K through 12, and all the way to secondary school and college. Of course, across these groups, we've aligned with ARM resources that we think will be best served in making sure that the ARM narrative and all of the potential ARM libraries could be in the hands of these developers, including kids. Today, we're going to be talking with a special panel of guests that really would showcase some of this work that Google has done and continues to do. We'll highlight the partnerships between ARM and Google in looking through this. We'll go through the resources that Google has applied over time with specific focus on TinyML and TensorFlow and related resources. We will certainly localize some of these research activity to ask questions around some of the local problems and constraints with infrastructure challenges as to how these developers and the developer groups could be better empowered. And certainly we would wrap up by looking at possible solutions, and the solutions that we want to speak about here are the solutions that would allow us to think through how best the developer groups and ARM, Google and ARM, GDG and ARM community could advance all of this going forward. So without further ado, let me introduce my panel. As you know, I'll have each panelist take a minute, introduce themselves, tell us who you are, what you do, why you do it, and why you're doing it in Africa. And then, yeah, we'll shoot on to the next question, starting with Pete.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stephen. So I'm Pete Warden. I'm the technical lead of the TensorFlow Lite Micro project, which is Google's open source machine learning framework for running on embedded systems. And I'm here because I've actually had a lot of people from Africa reach out asking me questions, sharing what they've been doing. And it's been really driven by the demand that I've seen through things like the GDG and the student groups for the kind of resources and materials that we've been producing. So I'm here, always to learn more about what we can do to help and collaborate with this work. And I'm really looking forward to, hearing from some of the other members of the panel about what we should be focused on.
Fantastic. Ahmad?
Hi, here in Nigeria it's evening, so I will say good evening. So my name is Ahmed Babar. I'm the co-founder of Startup Kano. a former GDG lead for Bayer University, and then the former GDG lead for Latvia, Google Developers Group, Latvia. I'm here to share my journey as a tech community in the northern Nigeria, how it started, where it is, and the challenges, and also the successes we've recorded in the developers community, and the way forward that we are looking into. And also looking forward to hearing your experiences and share more and do more, like Stephen said in the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Hello, my name is Robert, and I'm part of the Google Developer Experts program. So I'm a Google Developer Expert for machine learning and for the Google Cloud Platform. And what I do is essentially speak about, write about, and host code labs around the various Google technologies that I happen to be an expert in. And these are things that I've done even before I became an expert. And being an expert simply means that you have a passion for imparting knowledge, helping people solve problems, and you're happy to roll up your sleeves and go dig up the solution if it's not available out there. And I'm hoping that that's something that we're going to be able to do with TinyML and ARM going forward, where we're able to hold the hands of people who are passionate and impart knowledge, and also equip them to go out and build larger communities. So back to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Robert. And thank you all for being here. I will jump right into it. There's so much to talk about. Pete, your reputation speaks for itself. From the O'Reilly books to the work that you've done with TinyML local ecosystems, the nonprofits, the education platforms, but you've also been an incredible friend to the African developer ecosystem. Can you walk us through some of what you've seen, especially with regards to what the ecosystem has told you it needs, some of the constraints, and then also highlight some of the platforms and programs that you have also helped put together to attack some of these problems?
So thanks, Stephen. The number one thing that I hear from developers in Africa is around the challenges of actually getting hardware. It's not something that I often think about in the US, but even something that's as simple as ordering from Amazon an Arduino Nano board here, I hear from developers that they can run into all sorts of logistical problems with the ordering the actual shipping taking a long time, customs actually adding a lot more expense and even more time on top of that. And so I've seen a lot of cases where developers are actually having to share a device where a device that costs sort of $5 or $10 or $25 to pick up in the US or in Europe is actually several times that cost to actually get on the ground in Africa. And it's really one of the big things I'm hoping to get some help figuring out is how to get this pipeline of hardware, both for people to start developing with, but also, once we're seeing prototypes that are working to do useful stuff, once you have that prototype, how do you then actually get more versions of that hardware into people's hands so that it can be widely deployed? And the things that I see working are there's, this fantastic, amount of education and educational resources and kind of a hunger for, learning and doing research in this area, especially because in a lot of ways this area is so new for everyone. Um, we're starting off on a much more level playing field, where African educators and researchers and developers have just as much a chance of moving the field forward as everyone else, because there isn't this kind of existing large body of knowledge about this stuff. We're all figuring it out as we go along.
Fantastic. In addition to that, you've also been part of critical resources, training, tools, platforms. Can you shed some light on some of these communities that you've built out?
Yeah, so one of the places that I get a lot of feedback from African developers is through the free edX course that we did in conjunction with Harvard, which walks you through from having no machine learning or embedded system knowledge all the way through to actually being able to build devices and train your own models to do things like voice recognition, image recognition, recognizing gestures. And it's been awesome to see people picking up on that. There's also the TinyML book, which you can get in sort of ebook form, which I often get a lot of questions coming back from African developers, kind of asking me, how they can take stuff further. And there's the TinyML Foundation, which organizes meetups and has a whole bunch of great groups that are also based in Africa.
Fantastic, fantastic. Ahmed, you've been critical to a very, very special ecosystem in northern Nigeria. You started Startup Kano, but prior to that, at university level, you were leading the GDG in the local university and in the region. When you look at your community and you look at developers trying to come out of your community, or developers not coming out, but growing up in your community, what are some of the special opportunities that you've seen? And then, counter to that is, what are some of the challenges that you've seen? Definitely the northern Nigerian region in itself is a special opportunity and a special challenge. But for young developers in that region and for the developers in the communities that you've built, walk us through some of the successes, walk us through some of the headwinds.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I'll go straight. I'll start with the opportunities, and I'll be particular about a story or what I can share with the world that we are all happy with in the ecosystem we've seen. I'm a product of the developers ecosystem, and then we have one passionate developer who joined as a student back then at the Yusuf Metama Sule University. He's a tech enthusiast that lives in Kano, and he's so passionate about learning different tools that will enable him have gain more skills. And then when he joins the community, he learns the technology. He was particular about TensorFlow and machine learning. And after his graduation, or towards his graduation at the university, he started a startup. He started halal delivery, and since before the buzz of delivery systems in Nigeria, he started a unique delivery system where you can order different food from different restaurants using the same app without actually moving into another interface. So we've seen that as a remarkable journey for a developer that is in the northern part of Nigeria, where we don't have large penetrations of technology users, or there is no large market for the consumption of technology. But he was able to pass through those through the help of the community, the developers he works with, the designers he works with, the marketers and the engineers are all from the same locality which he grew from. Also, now looking at so I'll talk about the challenges. The typical case study in Kano is going to be number one is the infrastructure. We rely only on mobile data to access the internet. So sometimes we have downtime, and then it's difficult for you to actually get to the bottom of what you want to do on time. So that's the main infrastructure. Then power, electricity has been a challenge in Nigeria, but we're trying so hard. That's what we come up with the Startup Kano Hub, which we intend to cater for these developers, where they can have a place to come and use and have a community, have a sense of belonging, to talk to people, share ideas, and grow. So we try to provide basic infrastructure for them, and then community events at Startup Kano are always free. We don't charge communities to do that. The mindset is key. We tend to want to just be a developer and then become the next Mark Zuckerberg. Yes, that's the good dream, but then how hard, how well are you ready to push in and put in the efforts to get to that? And then quick wins has always been the at the top of the mind of newbies, those that are joining the community. But when the journey gets going, they tend to realize that it takes a lot of hard work and dedication to get to where they are. So gradually changing the mindset of the individual, also the society will just see you as a kid with a computer. You have better things to do. Stop punching keywords every day. There is the lack of strong mentorship and talent exposure, where we don't have real or strong industry experts. Recently, we have the likes of Robert, Aminu Ibrahim, and myself and Usman. Those are the people that we look for to the what would I call them, the pioneers of the GDGs are the mentors that we have, but we don't have people outside that cycle that are into core technology that could share industry insights for the developers to have a straight career path when they are starting. So that has been the challenges, and soft skills. And then also imposter syndrome is identified among some devs in the northern parts of Nigeria. So in a nutshell, this is how the ecosystem is, but we're taking those challenges one after the other in every possible way we can to see that we move past it, and also to build a sustainable developer ecosystem that could create jobs, build startups, and then work across the globe.
Thank you very much for that feedback. Robert, you wear this hat of being part of a select few of the Google developer experts. Could you first of all start off by telling us what that is? Tell us about that community. What is the expert community?
Right. Thank you, Stephen. So the expert community is really a bunch of individuals who are passionate about imparting knowledge, but they also have that technical skill or technical knowledge or technical expertise to back up what they're saying. So for example, I am a Google developer expert for machine learning. And what that means is that I'm able to talk about machine learning, but also I'm able to push out code that utilizes TensorFlow, which is Google's own numerical computation library. And before you can become an expert, there's a bunch of interviews that will take place. The first interview actually happens before you even get recommended. And so that sort of interview really is that someone takes a look at your history, right? In my case, I had what was called a community CV, which I had to say, here are different meetups that I've hosted, and here are the topics, and here's what the turnout looked like, and did I even have any documentary evidence for that? Luckily, on a few occasions, I had photographs that were taken during those sessions. Thankfully, I used Meetup prior to that time, so I also had the schedules up there that I was able to point at and say, hey, last year I had 13 speaking engagements. Luckily, I also had some that were even international, right? So it showed that I liked talking about machine learning at that point in time. And then going past that, I had an interview with an existing member of the Google developer ecosystem at that time, who ended up joining, I think it was DeepMind, but he's with Google now though. who interviewed me on my community involvement. And then post that, I got an interview from a Googler who's based out of China on the TensorFlow team, and we had to deep dive into the very core of TensorFlow at that point in time. So that's what it takes to be an expert. It's just the ability to get up, take your bath, go stand in front of 300 people and talk about something, right? And not have stage fright. But beyond that, it's also being able to support people behind the scenes. So on a few occasions, I've had people, some doing their PhD, some working, who have come to me and said, hey, I've had this challenge. I've not been able to solve it. And I then say, oh, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't see an article out there that talks about solving this particular problem. I go off for a few days, and then by the time we're done solving it, I have a new article that I'm able to push out. And that's the interesting thing about some of these blog posts. They're real problems that someone has had to solve, and then you say to yourself, well, if someone had it and I took time out helping them solve it, I may just as well write about it. It helps me remember what it was that I did to get through it. And B, you never know who else out there has a similar problem, but doesn't even have a direct contact to me, and they can't reach me to say, hey, please help out with something like this. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you very much. Pete, you wrote the book. You started out these platforms, you built out these communities, you're engaging African communities. What are some of the use cases for TinyML that you're seeing take flight? I loved your comment about how we're all at the same level of learning, right? But because of your interactions with the African devs, what are some of these use cases? What are the ones that excite you the most?
So one thing that I found really interesting is creative ways to use existing infrastructure. So there's been some projects around looking at old school dials and things like water meters and gas meters, and sticking a small device, small battery powered device with a camera that's actually able to look at those dials and turn the analog sort of needles and the sort of ticking over odometer style displays, and read them using computer vision locally on the device. And then that device is able to send that meter reading up to the cloud. So for just a few dollars worth of hardware, you're actually able to convert some existing infrastructure that isn't connected at all into something that can actually share data and information with the cloud in a way that's way cheaper and way easier than the traditional ways of, oh, we're going to have to buy a whole new smart meter, we're going to have to replumb this in, and also in a way that doesn't require any mains power. It can be run off a battery or off solar energy harvesting. So for me, that's a really good example of a creative approach driven by the constraints of the local environment, but that I think can actually have a big impact across the world. It's just, like we've seen over the past couple of decades, a lot of phone technology actually gets pioneered in Africa, just because that's the infrastructure that's kind of coming in, and there isn't the sort of legacy infrastructure that a lot of other places in the world have. So there are entirely new solutions coming forward. So that's one of my favorite examples.
Fantastic. Ahmed, you've seen a lot through Startup Kano. You've seen startups of every shape and size. But on the hardware side, of course, hardware is hard, right? As we all know. What are some of the, if you had a magic wand with the ARM community and you had to create a process for increasing the population of hardware startups in your community, what are some of the things you request?
So like Pete mentioned, in Africa, we always have the challenge of hardware tools to actually practice on. So recently, we just concluded, 2 months back, we just concluded a hardware IoT-based study jams for women and a few youths at the hub to see how they can actually implement what they've learned, and then they come up with a solution, a fire detection detecting system, and also a sensor, a navigation sensor where you can use it in your farm, so at home to check. So what we need is first the hardware, then secondly the resources to enable them, the code labs, the technology that they are going to leverage on the hardwares to actually make it come alive. So these are the two major things that we need. Apart from that, we have the community that are ready, that are passionate to do that. We have a place that they can always come to, and also we have a system of creating a network, a diverse network that they can leverage. And also there is a market for that. But what we basically need is the hardwares and also the technology that they're going to leverage those hardwares on.
Fantastic. Robert, you and I have worked closely in recent times in looking at how to really advance the agenda for ARM, Google, GDG, ARM community. And I know that you have some interesting opinions and recommendations as to how we can improve our developer relations in the region. Can you walk us through some of those in the clear context and really give us what you consider to be the current and current as of today keys of success?
Right. Thanks, Stephen. So I'm going to make a few suggestions, but I'm going to start from the business case for why Africans have difficulty with paying for things that the rest of the world doesn't have. And it's a similar story across a lot of African countries. Africa is currency controlled. So typically, we don't spend dollars. We have our local currencies. But when you try to make a purchase, even if you have a card that works, so for example, in Nigeria, we do have a MasterCard and Visa issued in local currency. Those cards could work on Amazon, for example, if you wanted to make a purchase, but there's a limit to how much you can spend in a month. Again, because you do not have dollars as an individual, you've got Naira. The central bank gives you a limit. It's currently $100 a month. There was a time when there was no limit, and then it got reduced to $300 a month, but it's currently $100 a month at most banks. And how that translates is you would think, oh, you could purchase this item for $25, which is true, but then there's shipping, and then there's customs. But then the problem is you might have other expenses that you've put on the card as well, right? And they could be recurrent. So, case in point is you might already have Netflix and maybe YouTube payments that you're making on the card. So while you've got an excess of that value in local currency, you've exhausted your monthly limit. So that's the real challenge. So what's the ask? The ask really is to see how ARM could have local partners who will stock these kits, and then individuals are able to make these purchases in local currency. right? And it doesn't matter even if the kits cost twice what they would cost on Amazon, or even 3 times what they would cost. But as long as they're in local currency, then we are able to circumvent all of those constraints that we've got. So that's the ask around the kits for the developer communities. The second ask is really around learning material. Now, I'm aware of developer.arm.com, but the other challenge with Africa is that our curriculum isn't the same as the rest of the world, right? Asia has got its curriculum, Europe has got its curriculum, we've got our curriculum. A lot of us do not have a proper STEM foundation. And as such, by the time that people develop interest in becoming whether software developers or hardware developers, they don't have that foundation. And it takes a lot more work to try and build up the foundation before you get them to that place. And that's why, Startup Kano has some of the challenges that it has, where when people get into the thick of things, they then realize that there's a whole lot more work that they need to put in. And how we can get some of this learning material is really from the final ask, which is, when we build the communities, then these communities can help with creating the learning content. And coming to the communities, we need to build communities. Google has done some work, quite a lot of work actually, not just some of it, quite a lot of work in building the developer ecosystem on the continent. We're going to need a similar push from ARM to build these communities. One thing that we need to note in building these communities on the continent is that the entire continent isn't one country and we don't speak one language. So things can't only be done in English. We must factor in the rest of the continent, whether it's Anglophone Africa or even Portuguese for 1 or 2 countries. Let's not forget Arabic for some of the North Africans as well. So we need to build communities. We need to reach people in the languages that they speak. So that's really, inclusivity, as we talk about. In building these communities, we need to focus on branding. We need to kind of try and replicate the Google Developer Expert Program. The reason for that being that hardware is hard, like you mentioned. There are all sorts of microcontrollers out there, right? And you're going to need the experts for people to reach out and say, hey, I'm trying this thing. You used a different microcontroller. I'm using a different microcontroller. It's not working. What would you suggest? And then these experts can roll up their sleeves and try and figure out what it is that might not be working in there. Communities are driven by events. So we need to have a calendar of events that will help to create awareness, spark the interest in what individuals are going to be doing going forward. So that's the ask.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for your time and input and suggestions. As I mentioned, from a community standpoint, from an ARM standpoint, if we do this right, this conversation should kick off a serialized set of content, material, engagement tools and resources that would allow us to really affect the developer ecosystems across Africa, and by extension, and to the other region that I serve, which is South America. I want to thank Pete, of course, for your continued diligence, effort, and leadership in engaging with the African developer ecosystems. Your work with education tools and platforms, with TinyML across foundations and programs. I want to thank Ahmed for your work in empowering a region in Nigeria, which is strife with other challenges, but you're coming out as a rose out of concrete to make sure that young people in the region, from educational institutions to startups, get the aspirational tools and resources that they need. And then certainly, Robert, thank you for your time in providing the expertise and the expert knowledge that will guide some of these narratives and really help navigate some of our strategies into the region. Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you for joining this session. And we look forward to continue working with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.